So Dr. Sally Miller is with us. Hello, Sally.
Hello, Rick.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And to just tell what handful of people might not know exactly who you are, Sally's an educator. She's a retired school principal, which I want to talk about a little bit, and a, a tremendous author and somebody who you should know through her work for sure. And it all started, at least the literary part of it started with Mourning and Dancing, a memoir of grief and recovery, and that was 1999. Is that correct?
Right. And how happy am I that it has been in print that long?
Yeah, well, and how talented were you to write a book at 14? That's an amazing.
Thank you.
That's a great thing. And then came Mourning and Dancing for Schools.
Correct.
And it's all about dealing with grief and with life-changing loss. Do I have that right?
Yes.
And so now we're looking forward to Mourning and Dancing, the group, and tell us a little bit about the purpose of this one.
Well, I have had a number of opportunities to set up and run grief support groups in the different places that we've lived, and that goes from New York City to LA to the Midwest. And I have hammered out a philosophy for having a grief support group. And by that I mean I tried different things, and I actually found that the educational seminar model is the best one for me. And so what we do every meeting is we have a topic, and I will have done some research on it and shared that with the group. And then the group discusses it, and then we find a way to apply it to our lives, to grief, to ways we can help ourselves and ways we can help other people. And what I have discovered in the last 20 years is that people often think of grief support groups as people coming together and telling their sad stories. And I think that's a good thing to do, and there's a time and place for that, but that's not in this model. This is, you identify a topic that most everyone can relate to. You discuss it, and then you talk about how does that relate to me, to us. And I've had a great deal of success with that.
And are there common characteristics among people who are dealing with grief?
Yes, there are. I mean, almost everybody that talks about grief says everybody's grief is different. Everybody's grief journey is different. And no two people grieve in the same way. And I think all those things are true to a certain extent. And the certain extent is, the commonality is, we're all human beings.
Right.
We all bleed red blood when we're cut. Anger, I mean, while it will take different sizes and shapes, but anger is anger. And depression is depression. And so those are characteristics you can discuss that we have in common.
I have myself personally a fairly recent situation where I spent 4 months out in Arizona with my dad, who ended up passed from Parkinson's disease and other complications in September. And it's a much longer road than you think it would be. Even when you're the loved one that you're mourning is older person. My dad was 89. And it had been, as people say, a good ride. However, if you're the person on the good ride, you like the good ride to keep going.
Yes, that's true.
So I thought that I would just sail through it. My mom had died about 4 years previously, and I thought, having been through that, that was an experience that was going to apply to whatever happened with my dad. And when it did, it had a much deeper effect on me than I thought it would. You find people entering into a period of grief that way, thinking, well, this is not going to be so bad, and it turns out tougher than they thought.
Yes. Many times I have heard that. And it has a lot to do with our culture, Rick, where we're kind of pull yourself up by your bootstraps and
Get over it.
and a can-do attitude. And if you just work hard enough, you can get through it. Well, the problem is if you're doing it by yourself, which a lot of people think they can do, is to just, I can just focus on this and I'll read some books and find the way to go through it. But the problem is you're looking for direction or help or wisdom from outside of yourself. And so if you're doing it alone, then the only wise counsel you're going to get is from somebody who's grieving.
Right.
And so I think that's why I focused in on a group, and that because we do have things in common, even with different life-changing losses, even with, you had two parents and they died, your relationship was different with each one, but we do focus on what we have in common.
Right.
And because of what you said, and you said, have you heard people say that? I have heard people say that. Now, here's what I've learned. Grief takes place over time, but it doesn't take place all the time. Obviously, the frequency, if we were charting it, is more intense in the early months. But over time, there are things that come up that remind you, that cause you to feel a need to react. And the reactions can be anything between a sweet memory to feelings of guilt.
There's a spectrum there.
Yeah, there is a spectrum. And so one of the things that a lot of people have reported to me is that whenever that washes over them, and a lot of people who talk about grief talk about there are waves. Grief comes up out of the water and then comes back down. And that when this happens, they aren't prepared for it, as you may not have been prepared for some of the things with your father's death.
Right.
And so I think it's very helpful to have other people who can say, I felt the same way. I had a similar reaction. And then it kind of dampens that feeling that you have that you may never come through this. Or lots of people have reported to me that they feel like they're losing it.
Right. I during the time that I was with my dad, I felt a number of times like I was losing it. And the thing with him was that it was a drawn out kind of situation. He was sick for quite some time, and you can't, when it gets towards the end of a period like that, you're also dealing with, I would imagine, other people have dealt with it the way, or thought about it the way I did it at certain times, a little bit guilty about thinking, well, maybe today is when he'll pass.
Yes. And then you feel guilty for thinking that.
Yeah, for looking forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
but
tough.
I think the best description of that and why that happens, it is so hard to see someone suffer.
Yeah.
That you want their suffering to end. I mean, if you could magically have them back in full health and youth, you wouldn't have had that thought.
Right.
But a lot of people, guilt is a biggie. It's a big nut to crack for people. And so that's that's what that's all about.
Yeah, the idea that you could have done more or done something different, or and
Yep.
as if you have some kind of wand and you can wave somebody's heart failure away or their Parkinson's disease away or whatever. And the in reading about the book, I read a thing that the workshops and speeches and support groups, um, it talks about acknowledging the powerful effects of life-changing loss, and that acknowledgement has got to be like somewhere near step one, because
Yes.
some people want
Yes.
to grit their teeth and not "I'm okay" kind of thing.
Right, they do. But also initially there's this period, even when you have been with that person through the process as they're dying, as you were with your father, there is this sort of shock that
Yeah.
comes over you. And I liken it to shock absorbers in a car. It's a shock that just kind of keeps you from taking it all in at once. And there's a little bit of denial that comes in, not as much for someone who has been there through the process, but certainly lots of losses come on suddenly. And it's almost like it doesn't seem real. Like, did
Yeah,
that happen?
right. This
And
is some
a
of what they
lot
call
of
about the denial stage. About
right,
yeah,
right. And of course, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross during the 70s is the person that kind of gave us this framework for grieving. She was a physician who worked with people that were terminally ill. And she began to see same patterns recurring when they were, you know, first getting the news. They were like, oh, I feel fine.
right.
Could there be a mistake?
You can think you're above and beyond some of these things, but at one point I found myself really pissed off. I
Yes,
thought, oh, this is the anger thing. I didn't think I'd
that's
have
the
that.
anger thing. And it is very real. And I think that's probably one of the most common denominators that people talk about is their anger. And I think it's even harder for women to be angry because of cultural
Oh yeah,
norms.
it was
Uh,
impossible for my mom to be
and
angry.
I don't know, men, we excuse anger in men more readily than we do in women. And she said, but that's a normal, natural reaction when the shock and the denial wears off. You're ticked off.
Yeah,
I mean,
and you don't know what's going to trigger one of these things. With me, the anger phase came in as I was going through my dad's bills,
yep.
and he had leased a car. And for anybody to sign, anybody who's 89 years up to a 3-year agreement about anything, just drove me nuts.
Yeah.
And I
Makes
got so
sense.
mad. I got so mad at General Motors, but I was really mad that my dad had passed. I mean,
Yes.
that's really what that was.
Well, I say this about grief. It's going to come out. Even long held unresolved grief, it's going to
Right.
come out. It will find its resolve. And it will, if you aren't regulating and learning how to handle it, it could come out in a whole bunch of bad ways. After
That's
my
right.
husband died and we were in our 20s and had a little toddler and a preschooler, um, I didn't think I was angry. I was hurt. I mean, my heart was broken. Uh, and then one day I was waiting for my sister while she was coming out of a store, and the people in the parking space next to me uh, pulled in too close to my car, and they opened their doors and banged it against my car, and people were getting in and out and rubbing the doors up and down
Oh
my car.
boy.
I rolled my window down and gave them what for. I didn't even recognize that they were parents of a friend I went to school with. I had been in their home many
Right.
times.
Well,
So the anger can just kind of engulf you.
yeah, it sure can take you over. And also, I found this interesting reading about the book and about your work about developing positive strategies for healing and developing skills in resilience. And that's not a thing that I had thought of as something you develop skills in. I've always thought that somebody was resilient or they weren't, but you can develop resilience skills. How do you do that?
Yes. Well, a lot of people think it's that resilience is a quality that
Right.
some people have and some people don't. So thank you for identifying it correctly as a skill. And anytime we want to learn how to do something, we have to learn how to do it. And so becoming a resilient person, and it is not just bouncing back. There's a little bit of it in there, but the definition of resilience is responding positively in the midst of negative circumstances.
Oh, interesting.
And so the research that was done on that, and maybe 35 years ago, was conducted in New York City, in some of the most difficult of urban housing situations, where there are drive-by shootings and people are abused and accosted and all that kind of thing. What is it? And they started with children. What is it that in that circumstance, there's some who rise up,
right,
and become neurosurgeons or great violinists? What? Well, there are some factors that can help a person build resilience. There is a person, nice if there's a couple, who believe in you, who have been a part of your day-to-day life, maybe, not necessarily a parent. It could be a neighbor, it could be a grandparent, it could be a great teacher, it could be a feeling counselor, who affirmed that you are of great value and that they believe that you can rise up. So that's one of the pieces. And then if you're in a great neighborhood, I mean, I think of all of the places in New York City that have been crime-ridden and difficult to live in. Great programs have come out of those circumstances.
Community building stuff.
Oh my goodness. And choirs and dancers, and it's having an environment in which you can grow and flourish somewhere. It may not be at home, it may not be on the streets, it may not be with any member of your family. It might be in the boys' choir.
Right.
And so trying to create around a person these healthy circumstances help. I mean, it makes a difference. And with resilience being the skill, the ability to respond positively, changes how you think. It's like, I'm not a loser. I'm not going to become an addict. I'm not, going to be killed on my way to school.
I'm not going to fall into this well of grief and never come out.
Precisely. And so it's this instinct first to a positive reaction. And then I think one of the best people is David Brooks in his book Second Mountain, who talks about it doesn't matter how bad things are, you have to find others. You can get through the grief, you can get through the debilitating factors that come with grief if you have others around you to help. So that kind of locks into all that research on resilience. So
if you have the can-do attitude, you need to sort of balance it out with a little bit of can't-do-it-alone attitude.
Yes, that's exactly, which is why I called this book The Group. A group takes on its own personality. You know this. You've worked in different organizations. You've worked with different people in our culture. You've been a part of a staff. You've been a part of a family. And you know that after a while, it takes on an identity. A group does. And you can feel this positive inclination to knowing how to manage it. You know, lots of people have always been amazed that someone that's been abused for years stays where they're being abused. But what is frightening is to leave and maybe not know how to handle where you get to. That they figured out a way to survive here. Yeah. And I know how to handle this. And if I leave, it could be worse.
I think it's interesting that much of this, the research you talk about was done in New York, because you and I both know that people from New York are the most difficult to deal with.
Well, I have certainly found that to be true personally, since my husband is a New Yorker. But let me tell you what a group does. There are, of course, a lot of group therapy groups, and we're not doing therapy in our group. We're learning in our group. We're accruing skills. We are encouraging each other to acquire these skills. We're encouraging each other to think in new ways. But there are people, there's a very interesting scholar by the name of Yalom, Y-A-L-U-M, and he and a few of his colleagues have written books about the power of groups. And it's so interesting because, once again, this is what the group can do. And listen to some of this. It helps people learn about giving of yourself to help others. By the way, I have a piece in the book that's called Does Helping Others Help? And the answer is absolutely, positively. Why? It takes your mind off yourself.
Right.
Help can only come in something you're able to do, so you know how to do it. But that's a big part of what makes a group a success. And then he talks about relieving emotions that sometimes we don't think other people could possibly understand. And having that affirmed is a big thing. Recognizing that shared feelings create some kind of a release.
Right.
And I had this one young woman in my group, along with her father and mother and their best friends went on a vacation, were in a horrible accident. The only person that survived was her father. So, of course, he had survivor guilt, but they came to the group for about 2 or 3 years. I have no limits on how long people stay in the group.
Right. Well,
I had somebody come in and stay in the group for like 3 or 4 years, 5 years, and then started his own group.
Yeah, people aren't going to generally ask or expect an answer to the question, how long does this last?
Right. And the most reassuring thing you can say at that time is what I said early on, it comes and goes.
Right.
It comes and goes. And so knowing that it comes and goes, when it comes, you're not thinking, I'm right back at square one. No, you're not. You can't go back there.
Let me ask about humor. Where humor fits into this puzzle. And it may depend on the individual. I know in my family, we were always joking around all the time. And a couple of days after my mom had passed, my dad, who'd been with her for 65 years, obviously it was a heavy burden on him. And we were answering his phone because they were getting a preponderance of these robocalls and scam calls, and it's a retirement community, so I figured it was a target-rich environment for that sort of stuff.
Yep, right.
And I answered one, and I sort of messed with the guy a little bit, and hung up the phone. And my dad came out of it. The clouds kind of parted over his head there for a minute, and he said, "Oh, if they call again, can I answer that one? I said, well, it's your phone, buddy. So
And isn't that
have
great?
at it.
He heard you.
Yeah.
And he heard you laughing, and he thought, I want to be a part of handling.
Yeah, I want to feel like that. And I was having a kind of a sort of a down day the other day, and I got a piece of mail of his that made me laugh because I'm still getting mail, and a lot of it's junk mail for him. And one was that Capital One was saying that his recent credit history is so good, he's eligible for this card. And, I had a good old laugh at that. I think
humor is a very important part for me, and I like to laugh, and I like to get people to laugh, but it's got to come from within.
Right.
It's got to be from and with somebody who's walked the walk.
Right.
Somebody else tries to make a joke, and all you can think of is, well, that's not the way it is, really.
Well, you can't hire a grief clown to come over to the house and.
That's exactly right.
That's not going to work.
But laughter is great. When I introduce a topic and don't get any response, I'll say, well, how does this square with you? What are you thinking is involved here? Let's talk about how we could list this out, and nobody says a word. And then I go, oh, I forgot to tell you. I ask a question and you answer. That's how we do this. And of course, everybody laughs.
There we go.
And then I say, let's start again.
Yep, and that opens the floor.
That opens the floor. You're absolutely right.
It's called Morning and Dancing, the group, a curriculum for grief support groups. And we've been talking to Dr. Sally Miller. Sally, we thank you so much for this really important work you're doing. And
I have to add one more thing, Rick.
Sure, absolutely.
The people I've talked to have started groups that have not lasted unanimously say after a while they felt they had given it all they had. They couldn't think of new stuff to do. So I included in this book 36 group meeting topics that you can take. You can use them however you want. You can claim them to be your own. You can read it aloud. But you have 3 years worth of topics for your monthly meetings.
That's extremely helpful. That's very good. And we can get our hands on this book via Amazon?
Amazon.com. Will, of course, got on yesterday and bought it.
Of course he did. Did he buy me one? Oh, I can hear a dollar bill hit the snow. I know.
I'm so happy to have a chance to talk with you.
We're happy to talk with you anytime. We do, and we'd love to have you back again. It's very important work you're doing, and want to tell anybody who's maybe having a situation right now that it doesn't last forever, and there are ways out of the woods, and it's very good stuff you're doing. So thank you so much, Sally. We appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Thank you to you for all you do.
Thanks.
Yep. Bye.
Well, we could talk to Sally Miller forever, and we will be talking with her some more, most assuredly. But I did want to get to some of your epitaphs. I asked people on Facebook to respond with what they would like their epitaph to be, and there's some good ones here. Started right off with Tommy, who said his epitaph would be, "This party sucks," which I like. Or Grant's, "I'd like a second opinion." There are some heartfelt ones. Nora writes, "Life was incredibly enriching and full because of her willingness to step out of her comfort zone." And Connie sent one in. "To live in the hearts of others means you will never really die." I like that. But a number of you did stay with the comedic angle there. Kevin writes, "I told you I was sick." I love that one. Our opinionated friend James says his might be, "He knew nothing except that you were probably wrong." And Kathy says, "Well, 2 wrongs don't make a right, but 3 rights make a left." That might be a non sequitur or a sequitur. I'm not sure what the difference is. Kelly says hers would be, "I can't believe I hate the whole thing." Imagine if you looked at Chris's tombstone or plaque or monument or whatever, and it said, "I knew if I hung around long enough, something like this would happen." Gregory says, contains no tattoos or piercings would be his epitaph. And Leanna's a musician, a very fine one, who says, I've been auditioning all my life. I finally got a call back. And speaking of careers, Bill says his epitaph would be, he was never meant to be an electrician. Whereas Penny chose a simple, hold my beer. And Molly says, if there's an 80% off sale at Macy's, don't pack the dirt too tight. She's going to come back and from the dead and shop. And maybe my favorite came from Matt, who said, that happened fast. And it happens very fast, doesn't it? Thank you all for those responses. There are more, and maybe we'll get to those another time. And keep an eye on us on Facebook for those things where you can help participate. And don't forget to like and comment and subscribe to our video channel on YouTube. We appreciate you doing that. Thank you very much. Have a good one.